I love that natural lull that comes when we're ready to get started. Hi, my name's Melissa Ledger. I'm Director of Cancer Prevention and Research at Cancer Council Western Australia. It's a real privilege to have you here with us today in the room and also online. We're looking forward to having our event that it not just adds on primetime TV, but it's the art and science of public health campaigns. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, wherever you are joining us today. For me, that's the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I'd like to offer acknowledgement and respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room today. Can I ask everyone just to put their phones on silent before we go any further? And also for those joining us online, please remember, if you've got any questions, please pop those on the Q&A function. You may know that Cancer Council's vision is for a cancer-free future and that our purpose is to reduce the incidence and impact of cancer on the community. So I feel really humbled to be able to stand here today and talk about the work of the Cancer Council that really started over 60 years ago. Much of the work that you'll hear about started from an investment from Cancer Council Western Australia with donations from the WA community. Cancer Council has become a trusted and well-respected organisation, not-for-profit cancer organisation in Western Australia. And as a result of that trust and our established reputation, we've been able to secure and deliver a number of government-funded agreements. And really, without that support from the Department of Health and Healthway through these agreements, we wouldn't have a hope of achieving our purpose. And so it makes the work of Cancer Council possible. So I'd like to thank them for being here today. I can see Julian Apton, the Director of Healthway, here in the audience. I can see Denise Sullivan here, I'm going to get it wrong, Acting Director General I think, is that right? Assistant. I totally botched that up. It wasn't on my notes. We'll check in with Denise later, but Denise, thank you for being here. Super important person, let's just say that. And I think Margie's here as well, and so welcoming them and their teams. And as I say, we can't do it without them. I'd also like to acknowledge Cancer Council staff from our past staff, our past CEOs who had the vision with the evidence that showed public education worked and public campaigns were important, took the challenge and made those a reality for us. So there's a number of staff in the room too. It would be nice to acknowledge those as well. And that's Mike Daub, a previous CEO of Cancer Council. We can see Terry Slevin, a previous director of the Prevention Division. Denise Sullivan again is a previous director of Make Smoking History in the room. But I know there's many people that have come before me, and I'm, as I say, humbled to be here to talk about the work that they started. But today we've also got some very special guests, and I'm going to let our panel facilitator introduce them to you. She's going to keep us all in line. She's going to keep them all in line. I'll be fine. And so it's with much pleasure I'm going to introduce Miriam Berthwick. She's an experienced journalist, strategic communications and media relations professional. She holds several non-executive director roles, including those with Lottery West and Healthway. And following a career with the ABC as a politics reporter on TV News and 7:30 Report, she's worked in both government and corporate sectors, while also consulting in media issues management, crisis communication, and media presentations training. Please welcome Miriam.
Thank you, Melissa, and welcome everyone. There are a few seats here if you want to do that and come in a little bit, because I'm going to be mostly looking that way. As Melissa mentioned, I do have a background in journalism, but I do want to be very transparent. I am on the board of Healthway as well. Now, today we have a lot to get through. We're in this discussion on public health campaigns. We want to touch on the research, the very detailed research that goes into making them successful, the techniques and methods that are used, the strategies, what works, what doesn't work in changing behaviour, We'll look at some of the other ways that public health campaigns can bring about behaviour change other than just investing in very expensive television advertisements. Now, we have two of our panellists beaming in from Melbourne today. So Dr. Sarah Durkin, hopefully is going to jump up on our screen in a second. Sarah is the Principal Research Fellow at the Centre for Behavioural Research in Cancer at Cancer Council Victoria. And she conducts research examining the impact of mass media messages and policies on health-related attitudes and behaviour change. She has extensive experience leading studies examining the impact of different types and ways of broadcasting public health campaigns, including anti-tobacco, alcohol harm, obesity prevention, and bowel cancer screening messages. So we're looking forward to hearing from Sarah. Also coming in via technology from Melbourne, there's Sarah. Lovely to see you. Welcome. Also coming in from Melbourne is Michael Murphy. Michael has social and market research experience spanning over 20 years, specialising in the use of qualitative research methods for the development of social marketing campaigns. He's conducted exploratory, strategic and concept testing. You'll hear what all of this is if this is not familiar language for you. Nationally and internationally on acclaimed campaigns in, now listen to this, smoking, alcohol, sun protection, nutrition, weight management, cancer screening. Michael, is there anything you haven't done? Early detection of heart disease, stroke, gambling, violence and respectful relationships, amongst others. So welcome, Michael. It's lovely to have you from Melbourne. Melissa introduced herself a little earlier, Cancer Council WA for 20 years. And so next to us, we have Tony Scampoli. Now, Tony's managing director of the creative advertising agency Gatecrasher. For 30 years, there's not much that Tony hasn't done in the creative world. He's been involved in communications and advertising, and his firm Gatecrasher is known for their creative, effective public health campaigns. A number of the ones you'll see today have had Tony's hand involved in them. He's delivered campaigns for Live Lighter, Making Smoking History, Alcoholics Anonymous, and many others. So welcome to all of our panellists. I really look forward to the Sid Seagull. It's 40 years ago. It's a very long campaign. The skin cancer ones came in about 2005, 27 years ago. So in a nutshell, what behaviour have they changed?
I think the behaviours we've seen have really been most noticeable in childhood. The opportunity of parents covering up their kids, those kids wearing rashies, wearing hats down at the beach. It's really been quite noticeable, and that's then moved through to schools. We've seen schools taking leadership in making sure their kids are protected from the UV, so wearing hats and not baseball caps anymore, those types of changes. And then workplaces, we've seen improvements in skin cancer prevention equipment provided by workplaces. There's legislation to support that too now. So we've slowly seen a change, and I think those 27 years really we've seen, and the stats show that we've really halved melanoma rates in Western Australia in the age group 15 to 39.
That's right, and it's really interesting to note the age group 15 to 39, because when you look at people our age, melanoma rates are still really high. One, because it's an ageing disease, but I think it's to do with that. I was talking to the president of the College of Dermatology recently, and she said it's to do with the lifelong impact of using hats and sunscreen. So just to note, melanoma rates have two different statistics. Make Smoking History, it started in 2055 waves of that ad, including 15 made here in WA. What impact, briefly, have they had?
Yep. So the Make Smoking History started with an aim of reducing smoking rates in Western Australia below 15%. And so really the contribution of the Make Smoking History campaign around people are now able to not smoke as freely as they once were. So the environment has had a really important impact on changing people's behaviour. So there's a lot more smoke-free environments, pubs and clubs, for example, that are no longer able to smoke in those areas, in the workplace, believe it or not. So changing those attitudes of people through the campaign has meant that those policies have been more easily
delivered, yeah.
Yeah,
So it's led to
supported by people.
legislation.
That's right. So Make Smoking History, we could argue, has contributed to the reduction in smoking rates in Western Australia, and it seems odd that that is also a reduction of by about half of people smoking that previously did. So the rates are now at around 10 or 11% in Western Australia. They were beyond 20% when the program started.
Live Lighter started 2012 at the National Heart Foundation, and then in 2018 the Cancer Council WA took over that campaign. In 9 years, what success would you say you've seen?
So the Live Lighter campaign it's really quite a new campaign compared to the other two as well, and that's important to remember, but we're already seeing changes in people's consumption of sugar sweetened beverages, for example, and sweet foods. We know that attitudes towards promotion and marketing, Western Australian adults support more regulation so that there's less promotion of marketing of those sort of junk foods and drinks. So they're the very early impacts of the Live Lighter campaign, and look forward to seing what more.
Seeing a reduction in sugary drinks, for example, and perhaps advertising on government buildings soon. And then the Find Cancer Early ads, they've been on our screen for about 10 years. UWA led a trial initially with those to address the delays in treatment and close the gap in cancer survival between rural and metropolitan areas, a really important area, particularly when you look at the size of Western Australia. So I believe that there's early signs there in the gap in survival for 3 of 5 of the most common causes of cancer. So there's no doubt that these public health campaigns, particularly when they run over long periods of time, are having a positive impact. Sarah, you and Michael both provide critical research to campaigns like these, and without oversimplifying the difference, Sarah, I think you as a quantitative researcher, you find out who is smoking, and Michael, you basically find out why they're doing it, if that's not too simplified an example. So Michael, I just want to quickly go to you first. Before a campaign gets underway, I want to understand the relationship between the client, say the Cancer Council, and you as the qualitative researcher. How much success of a campaign is influenced by the material, the research, the real focus on what the purpose of the campaign is before it gets underway? So this is to Michael. Sarah, sorry.
That's okay. It's a really interesting question, because it goes to that idea of you can't just simply say, oh, let's go and run a few focus groups, because that's almost always going to lead you down a path that is not very helpful. It's that thing of the more work you can do before you start doing the qualitative research to develop the campaign, in terms of understanding where people are already at the moment, understanding what the last campaign did, who was it effective for, who wasn't it effective for, what new things have we learned since the last campaign. So the more that my clients are able to work on that kind of information, and Sarah comes into that and Melissa comes into that, the more useful the qual research that we do will be for the campaigns.
Yeah. So Melissa, what sort of evidence from research might you take to Michael?
So we would have our campaign evaluation reports that show us what the outcomes of our previous campaigns were, but we also review the literature. We might do an environmental scan and see what other states are doing, what's been the impact on those campaigns from other jurisdictions.
You might also, would you get some evidence from experts, clinicians, doctors involved, so it really adds that gravitas, so he's got some real background that he can take to the focus groups?
Yep, absolutely. We've got medical experts that we rely on for feedback, also just for images, for example, making sure we've got the right images of cancer types.
Right, so accuracy.
And reviewing scripts as well.
Yeah. So Michael, coming back to you, the development of the brief, is that something that you spend time on before you go to those focus groups? Tell me a little bit more about how you really understand, because we are talking about this art and science balance, understand how to develop that brief. As
in to develop the research brief?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, that will be about that thing of identifying who is it that we might want to affect in the next round of a campaign? Is there a particular subgroup within the overall target audience that we want to get, or do we want to find out who is the next low-hanging fruit in relation to some of the issues that we're talking about? So that would be that part of it, and then it's about looking at so what is this particular piece of research? What are we specifically looking to do? And so, I remember with Melissa, some of the Live Lighter stuff. They'd found out information like the longer you carry excess body fat, the greater your risk of developing cancer. And so, we're putting messages like that to people and finding out how they respond to that kind of information. So it's about, in that sense, that first step is about working out what are the right messages that we can give to which groups of people.
Right, okay, that's really helpful. So you're dividing your audience up. So if we're looking at smoking, well, you might have a group of people who want to quit, you might have a group of people who have quit, you might have a group of people who are just anti-smoking. Okay, that's useful to have an understanding. Sarah, what sort of information might your areas of research provide to the client brief to better inform the concepts that are taken to the public?
I think we provide a fair bit of information into the briefing that would go to Michael to figure out, what we're actually trying to address. So, for example, with Live Lighter, the population might be more at a stage of needing education about the harms of carrying excess body weight. Whereas for something like smoking, where there's been campaigns on air for many years, it might be more about motivation and reminding people of the harms, as well as potentially, providing information that helps build people's confidence in their ability to quit, because of all the campaigns, there's people who've tried to quit multiple times but haven't been successful. So having, the needs of that target audience might be about building self-efficacy rather than education in the smoking area. And so some of the work that we would do is look at population surveys to see where the biggest groups of smokers are. So which, is it in the lower SES areas that people are having most trouble actually staying quit, or is it in other groups? And so if we find, okay, which is the case, it's the lower socioeconomic groups that seem to be quitting or trying to quit at the same levels as everyone else, but they are having less success in their quitting, that indicates to us, okay, we need to do something to build confidence and to help people stay quit. So then that can be fed into a brief to Michael, and we can then get him to explore what are the barriers, what might be some facilitators to helping people stay quit.
And also, is it telling Michael what we don't know?
Well, I think it's it's identifying what we don't know. So that's so with with building confidence, that's an area that we haven't done a hell of a lot of work in terms of campaigning for anti-smoking advertising. And so I think there's a lot that we still need to learn about the best ways to actually create those kinds of messages, and what kinds of messages might be the most useful. It might be, planning for the difficult situations, might be a good way to help people. It might be showing people just like them who've actually been successful in quitting and getting them to tell their stories about how they quit. But we don't actually know which one's the best at this stage. So that would be something that Michael could explore for us.
Yeah.
So Michael, you've got all this information, and I'm imagining that the richness of it is really important for you, so that when you go to the various focus groups, you actually really are able to nail the messages that finally might inform someone like Tony to create the creative. So you want an open conversation. I'm assuming that, not having any judgment is really important in somebody leading that sort of a conversation. How do you go about extracting from people in a focus group really pearls of wisdom that might be useful?
That's a really good question. Look, I mean, it's actually, on some levels, it's really simple because it's just about having a conversation. On some levels, it's really complex because it's just about having a conversation. So it's about the manner in which you have the conversation. And what we're trying to find out, I suppose, in particularly in this exploratory stage of research, is where people's triggers are about a certain issue. So what's the little issue that's going to shift them or change them or something like that? And so in the group discussion, to get that, like it's not very useful to Henry Ford, great quote, said that, you know, if I'd gone out to the market and said, what do we need next? People would have said faster horses. Okay. And so we can't just go to the market and ask people what do they want next. We actually need to take some things to them. And so this is where the background information from people like Sarah and Melissa that would say, well, what else have we understood from pathology? What else have we understood from what's motivating people? So we take those ideas to people and get them to respond to them and look at the way new ideas, new concepts, new messages, new pieces of information about smoking, about junk food, whatever it might be, are affecting people. And I think it's really important just to keep that in mind, is that we're not necessarily asking people to, you know, create faster horses. It's sort of up to us to do the creative bit, but we're asking people to give us their thoughts on the different ideas that we're coming up with. So it is very much about being open. It's very much about being non-judgmental and allowing any kind of issues to come up, whether, you know, whatever they might be.
Sarah, does your research already tell us, in a way, what works and what doesn't work? I mean, for different campaigns, obviously different things would work. And I remember you saying that the anti-smoking, that hard-hitting messages really work, but they might not work with another campaign. What's your research tell us about what works, what doesn't?
I think you've identified the issue there. It really depends on the context, where the target audience is at. So for smokers in Australia, they have had a lot of hard-hitting campaigns over many years, 15 to 20 years or so, and they have been shown to be very effective with very strong and rigorous evaluation designs. So we understand that they motivate people to put quitting at the top of their priority list. So, you know, there's, you know, 80+% of smokers want to quit, but it's the ads need to be pushing them, that want and desire to quit, up to the top of their priority list. So something that they have to deal with today, rather than I'll do it next week or next month. So that's been found to be the role of those motivational hard-hitting ads. They really do kind of push people to make it a priority. The early ads, you might remember the artery being squeezed and the brain cut in half and all of those ones. I think they were probably instrumental in both educating people and in motivating people. Whereas I think over the years there's been a bit of an evolution in the smoking, anti-smoking ads, and they've moved more towards the highly emotional personal stories about the impact of smoking on not only the person themselves, but on their family and friends, like the Zeta ad at the end of that reel that you saw. And we found that those kinds of ads can be particularly effective with people with lower education, people who have, you know, less trust in the medical and kind of government systems, because, you know, that's a real person telling their real story, and you can't deny, you know, the effects of that smoking's had on those people's lives. So, so that all of those types of ads have been shown to be really effective. And I feel like with Live Lighter kind of advertising that we're seeing now around sugary drinks, we're really probably at that education phase still. People there's not enough baseline knowledge to start doing the reminding and the reinforcing kind of messaging. We're still in the education phase with Live Lighter. And it's probably, you know, even more so with alcohol advertising. So people just, you know, a lot of people don't actually understand, you know, the degree of impact of alcohol on cancer risk. So it really depends on where the population is at in terms of their knowledge and the amount of kind of advertising and other messaging that's going on.
And also what, in a sense, what they want to take on board. And Michael, before we go to Tony, who's really going to give us more detail about the actual creatives here, with the Live Lighter campaign and this sort of increasing focus that we're seeing in public health campaigns in relation to obesity, can you use a word like fat? What happens when you drop a word like that in your focus groups?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Miriam, and it's particularly in this space. There's a lot of sensitivities around fat messaging, about fat shaming. There's a lot of concerns about, does that kind of thing have negative impacts in terms of people's health and well-being? So it's really important to understand how people respond to that sort of thing. So when we were doing some work for developing that most recent Live Lighter campaign, we were comparing language like excess body fat as compared to overweight. And so what we noticed in the group discussions is that if we use the term overweight, like in the messages, people get quite sensitive and they think they're being targeted, and they get quite defensive about the language and things like that. And so they don't tend to listen to the message. They don't tend to take them on board to the same degree. But if you use a term like excess body fat, what they're thinking about is this thing that sort of, it's not necessarily part of themselves. It's a little bit separate to self. And so you can think of excess body fat as this thing that I would like to change. But if I'm talking about overweight, I'm talking about me as a person being overweight, and that feels very judgmental. And so in that, we learned very quickly that that language, excess body fat, is far more effective as language than saying people who are overweight. It's depersonalizing in a sense, but it's also allowing people to, I suppose, really listen to the message and take on board the message rather than dismiss it.
Yeah, clever. And I imagine the whole sort of toxic phrase.
It's a very powerful language. Yes.
And so, Tony, I'm also thinking that you would want to be sitting in sometimes on these focus groups. I believe there's the one-way screen, so you can sit behind and watch, yes, which seems very cunning. What do you learn from actually just seeing these people's responses to the conversation?
Yeah, what I think the most powerful thing for the creative agency is actually observing what's going on in the room. So I'd encourage anyone who's working with an agency in research and clients to engage with your agency at a really early phase and actually engage them in the research. Was what Michael was referring to there, and I specifically remember that particular group in the Live Lighter campaign, there was a lot of emotion around the room, particularly when we started to talk and explore those topics of excess fat and overweight. And often what happens is it may not bear part of the creative execution in the end, but often we'll observe certain nuances and discussions within the room. So for instance, in that particular example, something that's very powerful that you will notice within the campaign, it's intertwined within the campaign, it's not particularly upfront, but this notion of you're not alone in the journey. And that really came through observation of the groups and the discussion. There was a couple of people who were very emotional about their weight journey, and they were supported by others in the room. So it helps us understand how to develop creative, but it also gives us little insights into things that we need to be mindful of. And mindful of, as Michael said, really not putting more barriers in place and trying to overcome those barriers so that the message is really, really clear.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you're wanting, I'm imagining, the people who are running campaigns, you're wanting to move this topic further along, and yet you're really needing to be where the public's at as well. Do you ever get some real gems that actually just then become the creative from listening in?
That will happen, absolutely, from time to time. And I think, again, referring back to Live Lighter, I know we're talking about that one a lot, that it's topical because it's recent. We are also involved in working with Michael in actually developing territories. So even before we get to a creative brief, there was a lot of consultative work between the research and agency and client, talking about what are the issues that we do need to address. Now, obviously, that's primarily Michael's space and client space, but we're also able to contribute, I think it was about half a dozen statements in the end into the testing, which explored some of these different statements. So as Michael said, it is just a conversation. By the way, he's a brilliant facilitator in terms of managing that process. But those statements really helped tease out a lot of discussion in the room. And often those sorts of discussions will be gems which will lead to certain aspects of the creative solution at the end of the day.
Bubble wrap. Did you say bubble wrap and tobacco? No?
No, that's not one of mine.
No, not yours. Okay.
I do remember that one, but no, it's not one of mine.
Well, you can claim it if you want. What about things getting lost in translation? We've just seen the federal government absolutely come a cropper with their consent ad and the milkshake. And so you'd think with this much sort of iterative, sensitive, thoughtful process, that you wouldn't actually have such a clangor?
It shouldn't happen. I can kind of understand where they were trying to go with that particular campaign, but executionally, they just didn't pull it off at all. And the reality is, I think any campaign like this is not down to any particular individual. It's a group of people, and it's got to be a trusted relationship between client and agency and researcher. And there's got to be a process in place. So all of these campaigns, all of the ones that we've been involved with, and many of the others you saw in that show reel, would have gone through a formative process, probably an expert reference group, then research, then concept testing, and then production and development. And so the number of hands and people who are involved in that process, someone should be able to put their hand up and say, are we really heading down the right path with this? There's enough people there that should know what they're doing.
Yeah. What about tried and true techniques? Testimonials, we saw Zita, really powerful. And the fact that Zita, did die, does that sometimes just become too powerful?
Oh, no, not at all. I think not at all too powerful. I think Zita Roberts was a fantastically strong woman who really wanted to make sure that the journey that she was going through was in some way, shape or form, stopping someone else from having to go through the same issues. And she was incredibly powerful. In fact, that campaign came out of a interview that Channel 7 had originally done with Zita Roberts, and then it became a campaign that we developed and then led on to other campaigns. We followed up, again, amazingly strong people, but her 3 surviving children were part of a campaign some years later as well. So testimonials, I think, as Sarah referred to, can be incredibly powerful. Some of the more rewarding campaigns I think we've been involved with have been testimonials. And obviously there's the hard-hitting stuff as well, but the testimonials are a particularly powerful sort of campaign style.
Other techniques, we certainly see the road safety ones have really graphic images of car crashes. Way back, we had the Grim Reaper. It was all fear. It was terrifying. I'm sure if we go back now, a bit like going back to the early Doctor Who's, it probably looks a bit clunky. But now, does just purely hard-hitting and just fear work?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. Referring back to Grim Reaper, I think, yes, it was frightening, but it had to establish a discussion in the community about an issue. And so it had to be that powerful in order to do so. Again, referring to the VoiceBox campaign, I still can't watch the images. And I know that it's very distressing. But interestingly, in all our evaluation, there's often a question in Making History about, do you still support sort of strong campaigns? And overwhelmingly, even amongst the smokers who are surveyed in those evaluations, they say yes. So it's still very strongly supported. And as Sarah said, we know that they still have a role. And in fact, I know because of the rating of that particular TV, presents challenges for your media agencies who are sitting over there, like Initiative, who did a great job on that campaign. So it makes it very difficult, and there are challenges, but it does certainly have its purpose.
But there must be barriers. People must have mental barriers. You've just said that the VoiceBox one is just perhaps a step too far for you. So there's mental barriers you have to consider, and unintended consequences, I imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, and Sarah's really set this up for us, there must be different types of approaches, for different types of campaigns. And if we come back to the comment about obesity campaigns, that whole thing of stigmatizing. So 40 years of skin cancer campaigns, 30 plus years for quit smoking campaigns, a little bit less, a little bit more. Okay, Mike Daub's giving me the hand signals. People get inured and can come along the journey. But starting out, you must have mental barriers and unintended consequences.
Yeah, there are often barriers, I think, and particularly when you're looking at the longer sort of forms of the campaigns, like the Making History, which has been around for such a long time. And often people say, well, how can you continue to produce campaigns around quitting smoking? Because you need to find new ways into those sorts of campaigns. And you need to look at that audience as not a homogenous audience. It's not just a single type of person. different things, different motivators, different barriers. So it's about a cumulative effect over a period of time. So a campaign might work for a certain type of person and another campaign might work for another. So it's never a silver bullet solution. It's about a cumulative effect over a really long period of time. And things like, which I think is why VoiceBox has a role, why testimonial has a role, and why we're often looking for new territories into space. So for instance, it's not always just the fear of death in smoking cessation, for instance. It's often about the impact on your life more broadly. So what happens to you once you've had this kind of surgery? What impact does that have on your life? That may be more powerful for a certain type of audience. So it's complex and there's never a single solution, and it's about lots of ways into a particular category or particular area.
Sarah, Tony just a second ago alluded to the whole measuring of the campaigns. Does anyone watch TV anymore, or is it all streaming? How do you measure now? It must be challenging.
Yes, it's become a big challenge for all of us, I think, is trying to measure the extent to which our target populations are being reached. Over the last 10 years or so, we've had diminishing audiences to TV. And I think, and that's been a generational shift as well, so that younger people are less likely to watch TV than older people. And, young people still do watch TV. And when you look at the data from Roy Morgan and Deloitte, you can see that they are still watching it, and they're watching it at fairly, decent levels. But, the streaming services, gaming, social media, other forms of online entertainment have definitely, eaten away at that audience. So that we need to find new ways of actually measuring the extent to which a campaign has reached the population and how frequently it's reached the population. It's a difficult thing to measure because you're trying to track people over multiple devices and multiple channels. So, someone might be exposed to your ad on TV, and then they might be exposed on social media as well. But you can't kind of deduplicate that person to understand how many people in the actual population have been exposed, which makes it very difficult to understand, the broader reach and the frequency. So that's a challenge that, media agencies like Nielsen are grappling with at the moment. And I know at the moment what they're trying to do is just track people over digital devices, so across tablets and laptops and phones. They're just trying to do that part of it without even thinking about TV yet, because that's the next big challenge, to kind of link across channels.
The other challenges that you mentioned to me about the increasing use of the digital platforms and the many different ones is the impact of an ad when someone receives it sitting by themselves on their phone or iPad is different from sitting together, perhaps with the family or partner in a room on the telly. Tell me a little bit about what that challenge is.
Yeah, so we have research colleagues, Emily Brennan and Sally Dunlop, have demonstrated through fairly rigorous research that a big part of the campaign's effects, in smoking at least, is the ad prompted discussions that they generate. So if you're watching an ad on TV with your family and friends, a full-on hard-hitting anti-smoking ad comes on, and your wife or your children say to you, "Hey, Mum, you really have to quit. I don't want you to die," that kind of thing, then that has a big impact on people's motivation and commitment to quitting. So this shift to much more solo viewing of media, so that people are watching on their iPads in their bedroom by themselves, all the kids are in different rooms, you're not getting the same exposure to the non-target audience, so the people surrounding the smoker. And so I think we need to actually examine what's happening then with the discussions, because there could be online discussions that are happening, but because that kind of media is generally much more targeted to the target audience, and you don't get that kind of bonus of exposure to the people around them. We need to figure out what kinds of discussions are happening. So maybe it's between two smokers that the discussions are happening, and what kind of discussion does that generate? Are we missing out on those those kind of social norm changes and that interpersonal pressure that we used to get from broadcast television campaigns.
Michael, what we're really also referring to is the things that have changed over time. And you've been in this industry for what, 20, 30 years now. I'm assuming that people are more clever. They're more aware that ads are there to really influence them, if not manipulate them. Have you had to factor in that sort of more detailed knowledge and understanding that the public now have about being used by ads?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more campaign literacy around at the moment. So people understand a lot more. If they see an ad on telly, they've got a sense of, oh, that's trying to do this to me, or that's trying to get me to do this. And particularly when we're testing ads, they will say this. And people in our group discussions are using marketing language and marketing jargon when they're responding. And we have to be both mindful, but also a little bit careful of what's going on with that. But certainly that notion of literacy, campaign literacy is part of it. But so there are things that you can do. So one of the things that we notice at the moment, say we're talking about these more hard-hitting ads, is particularly say with smoking, is that if you're a smoker, you've been exposed to these hard-hitting things for such a long time. You see it on your packet every time you open it up. And if you're going to continue to smoke, you need to, somewhere in your mind, you need to be able to have worked out a way of, how do I not take notice of that thing right now? How do I shut it out of my mind while I have this cigarette that I really want to have? And so, it's important for us in our group discussions, in our research, is to try to identify, so what are people doing with those kind of moments? What's their thinking that's going on behind that? But the other thing, and this goes back, I think, to some of the stuff that Tony was talking about before, is if we can find a context in which this message has some relevance for people, and that might be that idea of standing out your back door having a cigarette, or it might be the thing, you saw the Live Lighter thing about people flipping through their phones on the apps to get some takeaway food. I mean, no one would flip through your phone and look at disgusting pictures of body fat and things like that. We wouldn't do that. But what they're able to do with that campaign is say, here's something you do. You sit on a couch together and you flick through the phone and you look at your takeaway food. And so now we can put that kind of imagery into that thing you're familiar with. So it's about getting more clever about, so we go back to the Grim Reaper, and that was just, blunt in your face, there's a scythe and it cuts through you. So we actually can't be quite as simplistic as that anymore. We actually have to be a lot more clever in the way we get these messages across. And I think a big part of that is understanding the context in which people, one, do the behaviour, but also take on board the information, and sort of weaving out our stories, our advertising stories, into those narratives of people's lives in a way that they go, oh, that's me. Oh, so this is about me. And I think they're really important things to look for in developing the ads.
I do want to get to Melissa and the ways that we can influence communities without spending on big TV campaigns. But Sarah, before we do that, I just want to ask, what more do we need to know? We haven't even touched on the diverse groups within our community. We haven't talked about Indigenous, remote, rural, migrants. How do we, we've certainly seen that the failure that can happen when campaigns haven't considered, different languages and different cultural audiences, or audiences from different cultures from ours. What do we need to still know in our population that we haven't really explored enough?
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point. I think we have focused mainly on the broad population for most of our campaigning over time. And I think, I actually think there's a lot we can learn from working with particular communities, whether it's an Indigenous community who is, wanting to focus on strength-based approaches, or a holistic community approach to messaging. We can learn from that. Or like the Don't Make Smokes Your Story campaign that the National Tobacco Campaign put out, which was all about narrative messaging. So talking about not making their life be about cigarettes, and their kids remembering them in terms of having been affected by cigarettes. So I think we need to not only be conscious of working and figuring out what different cultural groups, LGBTIQ groups, Indigenous groups, what their needs are, where they're at in terms of understanding of the health harms, or what kinds of messages are going to work with them, but be also aware of and on the lookout for those kinds of messages that are going to actually work for the broader population. I think it can really expand the horizons for the broader messaging as well, if we can learn from the work that we do with those groups.
Yeah. And Tony, just quickly before we go to Melissa, sorry, Melissa, you're still in the holding pattern. You touched on earlier that there's no such thing as a silver bullet. No. We've got different groups and different socioeconomic groups with different interest and accessibility to these sorts of ads. So how do you target them all? Or is it all in the media buy? And can you explain what the media buy is?
Oh, I should probably refer that question to my partners in the second row there. Yeah, from a creative perspective, we have to be obviously cognizant of the fact that there are multiple sort of segments of audience that we have to appeal to, but we do need to, in these campaigns, take a population view kind of approach potentially. What we do work really hard at, is making sure that we don't unintentionally put up any particular barriers which may cause self-exclusion, or well, that's not me, so therefore I won't listen to this. So even in the Live Lighter example, you look at the talent selection, the way it's shot, we're very, very cautious and very cognizant of making sure that everybody can literally see themselves in those situations. And referring back to what Michael was talking about, that moment where we exposed that creative to our groups, people were literally, their response was, oh, that's me. I do that on Friday night. And that was a really nice creative solution that I think does appeal to a wide variety of audiences. But then, of course, there's media strategy as well, in making sure that not only does the creative get to the right place, but at the right place at the right time and to the right audiences. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of all those factors.
And a big factor for a client, Melissa, is cost, and TV is expensive. And we've just heard how extraordinarily detailed the amount of research, the iterative going back and forth, the testing that occurs, all of that is expensive. If there are other ways, what other ways does Cancer Council reach communities that is not spending so much on TV? How else do you reach them?
The first thing I'd like to say is the campaigns are really important to lead some of the conversations that you'd have in the community, but they are also an opportunity so that when people have seen the campaign, that they then go into their community and they're supported in the community by an environment that supports them to have the behaviour we're trying to encourage. So, for example, for our SunSmart campaign, ensuring that there's adequate shade. It can be something as simple as that helps support people to be SunSmart. Most people want to be SunSmart, but it can be hard if there's not adequate shade. That type of thing is really important, that the campaign helps us get there. And the same with making sure that we use the campaign for other purposes, not just the ads on TV, that there's PR and media strategy, that we've got a website that really drives people to our website. They can get more information. They could get, for Live Lighter, you could get recipes, you can get a menu planner, you could calculate how many sugary drinks you're drinking in a week and figure out how many kilojoules you're drinking, how much might that increase your weight gain.
So leveraging off the campaigns by providing really good resources that are accessible to community groups, to schools, to local governments is certainly one element.
That's right.
Making an impact on policy, and that can happen, I imagine, at many different levels. Let's just talk about environment, because you've touched on it a little bit. Policy that brings about change in the environment. And let's break it down to, say, a school. So school policy and changing an environment. You recently, I believe, asked TKI to do some research on what advertising do students leaving school see in their first, 150 metres of a school?
There was a few different scenarios that researcher looked at. So Dr. Gina Trapp did some research last year looking at the journey to school, and they looked at the first 250 metres for students and then 500 metres. And they've identified 30% of the ads that children are exposed to on their way to school were for food, and 3/4 of those ads were for junk food.
Right.
So children are seeing, you know, they're on their journey, they're exposed to junk food advertising and sugar sweetened beverage advertising as a matter of course.
And we already have rules that say not allowed to have alcohol ads in the close vicinity of a school, but where we still have sugary drinks and junk food. So I'm hearing that using research gives you evidence to go to, whether it's local government, school, state government, to change their policies. So it's very multi-layered, isn't it?
It is. It's really all levels of government need to be involved when we're talking about policy. So whoever's owning the property. So for example, the state government own buses and train stations. Local governments own bus shelters. So it's quite complicated as well, that we need to really influence policy at a number of levels, but also making sure that those ads are regulated by government, not by industry groups or vested interest groups. So that's an important part of the work we do. And the ads help communities see, oh yes, I am exposed to ads. It helps join the dots when you've got an overarching campaign and you're trying to influence decision makers, if the community are also on board with the changes that you want to achieve.
Yeah, so there's another level you've just highlighted, which is stakeholder management and lobbyists and politicians, and not always easy to corral them all in the same direction. I do want to just briefly throw to Mike Daub, who's sitting in the front row over there. In our state, if there is somebody who has had the most relentless impact on bringing about change in relation to smoking rates, it's you, Mike. And I know you can't sum up 40 years or 50 years of work, but if you were to say in a sentence or two, what really had the most impact? We've just heard Melissa talk about leveraging the campaigns, working at different levels of government and whether it's schools and what have you. But those key stakeholders and politicians and the impact of ministers, what works really when you look back on what you achieved?
Yes, as I said to you, well, we just briefly mentioned this earlier, I'll do that in just under 45 minutes. Look, the first thing is just how many people. It doesn't need a lot of people, but it does need a reasonable number of people working together. It's never one person or one group in isolation. And you need a really great group of people who are all focused in the same way. When you're talking about advocacy in particular, it's people who are professional about advocacy, people who know what they want. I've so often sat with ministers, and when I was Director General, people would come in and lobby, and they'd talk at you for an hour, and then they'd go away, and the minister would say, well, they didn't tell us what they wanted, so we can just ignore them. You've actually got to know what you want. I think crucially in tobacco, as in these areas, having a really strong evidence base and working from the evidence and drawing constant attention to the magnitude of the problem, the strength of the evidence, and the strength of the evidence for action, not overstating the case. This is a miracle cure and will solve the problem overnight. Knowing the opposition and exposing the opposition, tremendously important, because it just the opposition gets more and more professional and nastier and nastier. So knowing them and exposing them, I think critical. Come back to my earlier point. No, we'll finish in a moment. Working in coalitions. I think there's one thing we've learned, and that applies in these areas too, in alcohol and obesity. Working in coalitions has made a difference. I do want to comment on the importance of media campaigns. Mass media campaigns, you're right, they're expensive, although it's still peanuts by commercial standards, and peanuts in comparison with what government spends on other issues. The budget papers tell us just the other day that government's expecting federally to get $15 billion in tobacco revenue. So, spending a few millions on media campaigns in that context isn't quite as much as as it might seem, and certainly the industry spends vastly more. But in terms of media campaigns, when we were pressing for tobacco ad bans that came in 1990, 91, I lost count of the number of politicians who told me how they'd been influenced by those early dramatic quick campaigns. It gets through to them. And, we can write as many letters and whatever, but seeing it on media over and over again, they watch media, it gets through to them. So I think media campaigns are so important in terms of getting public on side, drawing attention to the problem, and getting politicians on side and persuading them that further action is needed. So I think, this area is just as important as it ever was. And I think the final message from me, or the final two messages from me rather, are one, going back to the issue of working in coalitions, working together, working with your colleagues, and finally, staying with it. I often say that overnight success takes time. And it's so important to stay with it. Then not to be complacent, because there are always more steps to go, but just staying with it and keeping a campaign going. And one of the things that for me is so exciting about the conference the last few days and the work that's being done by Terry and the others at PHAA is seeing the new generation of campaigners coming through. And I think that's something that we've got to encourage as well, rather than just assume that it's all been done. So I think, we do actually know what needs to be done. We've just got to keep doing it, stay with it, be alert to the opposition, and never rest on our laurels, because if you rest on your laurels, you're wearing them in the wrong place.
Well, you're certainly to be applauded for staying for the long game, playing the long game. And look, this we've certainly also run out of time, which just shows the richness of this topic. But I do want, if there's any burning questions from the floor, we do have the one microphone. I'd love to hear. We can address our people in the East States as well as here. Has anyone got something they would like to raise? All right. Look, morning tea is definitely calling upon us. I hope all of you really got the sense of how much detail, how many layers, how much communication, how much trust sits within the long, dedicated process to deliver public health campaigns, whether that's through television advertising, whether it's through stakeholder management, whether it's through providing really good resources. It's really quite outstanding. I think in Western Australia in particular, we can be incredibly grateful. There is a question up the back. I love it. If you keep talking, people will fill in the space.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I do apologise. My question is about the challenge of pushing a society. By definition, all of the campaigns that we've run over 25 or more years is about changing what's currently normal, and making change creates discomfort. And for the large part, governments like to outsource the creation of discomfort to somebody else because they have to be popular to be re-elected. So my question is how organisations who run these campaigns have to manage that discomfort. If you're an organisation that looks to raise funds through charitable events, you've got to keep your audience on side in the way that governments need to ensure that funds come through the door from a charitable point of view. And yet these campaigns over many years have had to push those societies into areas of discomfort.
So let's go to Melissa, because I think that's where it's probably most well directed. How do you manage that discomfort to keep pushing change?
I think I shouldn't start with I think. The evidence tells us what works. And as an independent organisation that's well respected and credible, and the community expects us to tell them the truth. And having the evidence behind us, the process that you've just heard, we've got a remarkable process as at Cancer Council Western Australia to ensure that we don't miss a step, that all of those fingers and touch points that we have with our agencies in our own organisation, undertaking the process we've heard about today, gives us confidence to be able to deliver some of those really hard-hitting campaigns. some of the new campaigns saying the same old thing in a new way really gives us the confidence to do that when we've had such a robust process. But it's also expected of an organisation like Cancer Council that we would be leading a leading light in providing information and seeing the change that we want is really important to us, that if we're really serious about reducing the incidence of cancer, we need to use all of the tools that are available to us to do that.
And the reputation and the funding, the gravitas that Cancer Council really has in our state. And really where I was up to in wrapping up is just saying how fortunate we are in Western Australia, what a civilised place that we have this sort of attention and funding going into these campaigns. And of course, no one can rest on our laurels. It's going to be always some effort and determination, as Mike Daub has really indicated. It's got to be relentless, it's got to be ongoing. But I would like to very much thank all of you for coming along today. I'm sure the discussions will be continue over morning tea. I want to thank each of our panellists for coming, and I hope you each took something out of the morning. So thank you very much.
It doesn't get to, Miriam doesn't get to finish it though, because I have to say thank you to Miriam. So thank you so much for joining us today, really teasing out that information that our stakeholders that are in the room here can go forth and continue to work with us to make those changes that we're keen to do. We talked about morning tea. Obviously, if you're online, please go do make a cuppa, but please make sure you're back by 10:30. And for everyone else, you will get to see the current Cancer Council staff who are so dedicated to the campaigns, some of which you've heard about already, but we've got some more for you to hear about when you come back from morning tea. And that is really important, that you get to see our current staff who are hardworking, dedicated, and really have been the right here, right now for these campaigns. So please come back at 10:30. We'll get started. Welcome back everyone. It's great to see so many people back in the room after the break, that very delicious break. This is the rapid fire session, so get ready. It's going to happen really quickly. So we'd now like to take really all those arty, sciencey bits that you've just heard about. All of that has really now laid the groundwork for what we're about to hear about today. And it is, I guess, a bit of an indulgence, because these are Cancer Council campaigns. We're going to hear from a number of Cancer Council staff around the campaigns we've run using those processes that we've just heard about. So these are our major campaigns, and in some cases, some minor campaigns. So I hope you enjoy it. Staying in sort of on theme with rapid fire, the introductions are going to be swift as well. So we're just doing a bit of a tag team, so I don't have to keep getting up here and introduce people. So first cab off the rank, I'd like to introduce Livy Jardine, who's our Make Smoking History Manager. Welcome, Livy.
Thank you, Melissa. Kaya, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting this morning, the Whadjuk and the Noongar people, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge the significant leadership the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues play in leading tobacco control efforts in WA and Australia more broadly. So my name, as Melissa said, is Livy Jardine, and I'm a very proud manager of the Make Smoking History team. Oops, here we go. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the really wonderful partnership between the Department of Health WA, Healthway and Cancer Council WA over 20 years now that brings the Make Smoking History program to life. A little bit about our approach. So our approach in the Make Smoking History program is multifaceted. There was some conversation this morning about how there is no silver bullet and that a comprehensive approach is required. So we run mass media campaigns, including TV, radio and online, social media, policy and research. We run a Make Smoking History for Community Services program. We do capacity building. We work with Healthway on their sponsored events, media and public relations, and resources, including our website. And all these efforts together drive down the prevalence of smoking in WA. And when Make Smoking History, which was formerly Target 15, started back in the year 2000, smoking rates were around 22% in WA, and we've seen them more than halve over the past 20 years. Okay, so why is the public education component of campaigns so important? So public education is critical in preventing young people from starting to smoke, providing information with constant reminders of harms associated with smoking, prompting quit attempts. And we talked about this a little bit before. So building public attitude that cigarettes are not a normal consumer product, making the public more supportive of tobacco control reforms. And we refer to this as softening the ground. Oops. Oh, okay. There we go. Okay, so reaching people who smoke. So this graph just basically shows that smokers in WA still watch quite a bit of television. They also use the internet, they see outdoor advertising, and they listen to the radio as well. So whilst we still need to be adapting forms of media and considering TV, consumption habits over time, we still do know that smokers watch free-to-air TV, and that TV advertising does a lot of our heavy lifting for us. So some of you may recognise these campaigns from over the years. So Make Smoking History produces, airs and evaluates mass media advertising that targets all adult smokers in WA 18+. We run at least 3 TV-led, or at least 2 to 3 TV-led media campaigns per year. With the most recent one, you would have seen probably the Voice Box campaign, which we launched last year. So advertising works to constantly remind people that tobacco is not a normal product, and in doing so motivates people to make quit attempts. And we do know that, and research does tell us that anti-smoking ads using personal testimonies, hard-hitting graphic imagery and emotive messages, and talk about the negative health effects of smoking have been the most effective in prompting quit attempts. So how do we get a campaign to air? So as a campaign team, we first look at should we use an existing campaign? So we might kind of revamp an existing Make Smoking History campaign from the campaign bank, or we might look, but we also do a scan of campaigns that are being developed by other cancer councils and government organisations across Australia and also overseas as well. For instance, we have used the Terry's Tips campaign that was developed in the USA. And similarly, our campaigns here produced here in WA have been used interstate and globally as well. We analyse existing evaluation results to determine if further testing is required in WA before airing the ad. And then every 2 years, we are funded to create a new campaign. So, and here it sort of steps you through the process of a new campaign, which all these aspects have been covered today. So we do formative research, which can include qualitative research, a review of literature, or Make Smoking History evaluation results. We move into concept development, concept testing, which identifies the effective ad, and then we move into campaign production, which is really fun, and then we evaluate the effectiveness of the campaign. So I'm just going to run you through a quick case study, which was 16 Cancers, which is a campaign that aired for the first time in WA back in 2014. So there was a few things going on at the time. First of all, we were looking very closely at the report of the Surgeon General, which really outlined the 16 cancers that are caused by smoking. And also through focus groups, we found that many greatly underestimate their risk of smoking-related illness. Most cannot name more than 1 or 2 cancers caused by smoking, and emotionally intense and graphic imagery focusing on the negative health consequences are most effective in targeting smokers. So from there, we combined all of that. And when I say we, my effort was minimal and my contribution was minimal, and it was really a team effort, and then I actually headed off on parental leave. So credit to everyone who ran this campaign. And then from there, we briefed Gatecrusher, the agency that we've worked closely with for 20 years now, and they developed 2 concepts. So, and this was the concept, the 16 cancers concept in its very early stages. So Gatecrusher developed 2 concepts, and then they developed animatics from those concepts. And then we took them to online testing with an external agency. So this is how 16 cancers looked in the very early stages. And then in animatic form, that went to testing. And then we moved into campaign production. So we took the animatics and we brought them to life. Once again, I wasn't there, but credit to the team. So you can see the very powerful imagery that was developed from the animatics. And we also developed, the team developed secondary media creatives based on the smoking causes 16 different types of cancer. And there was quite a creative use of the graphic imagery on cigarette packets to really hammer home those key messages. And then the campaign aired, and we then took the campaign to evaluation. So in the Make Smoking History campaign, we do a post-campaign telephone survey of 200 smokers or recent quitters aged 18 to 54. So the Survey Research Centre collects the data, and the WA Cancer Prevention Research Unit, WAPRU, analyses the data and produces the report. So, and this is our current arrangement. So quotas are applied to the sample by geolocation. Either, we have a percentage of metro and a percentage of regional, and we also try and get good representation across different age groups and also genders as well. So we measure attitudes towards smoking, smoking behaviour, and awareness and impact of campaign advertising. And you can see that 16 cancers, for example, did really well in the scheme of things. Okay, so we ran 16 cancers, and we've run it various times over the last 7 or so years. But the team did some further analysis to help guide some of our future conversations about what we would air next. So I'm just going to show you a graph, and you can see a bit about the campaign, the perceived effectiveness amongst smokers, encouraging them to quit smoking and review their decision to smoke. So according to smokers, these are the campaigns that were effective for them. So if you look at the very dark green color, and it doesn't look quite dark green to me, but the darkest color, they're the campaigns that were real life testimonials, so they perform really well. And then if you look at the aqua color, so you look at Zeta, Adrian's regret, Zeta's story, etc., their real life testimonials where the protagonist dies. Also very confronting and also highly effective advertising. You can also see the red bars, and that's the ones where there's images of body organs or surgery, or looking at the insides of bodies. So things like everybody knows, 16 cancers, didn't listen, perform really well. And then you can also see the ones with the stars on the top. And that shows ads that include tracheostomies and also feeding tubes as well. You would notice there were feeding tubes in both 16 cancers and Adrian's regret. And it's also interesting to know that ads with songs rated quite highly. So we haven't showed that on the graph, but we have used quite distinctive music in some of our campaigns, including Everybody Knows. We use Sugar Sugar in the Last Dance advertisement. Que Sera Sera was played, and also piano music of Unchained Melody was in Zeta. So it seems to be also that music is quite powerful. So what came after that? Well, we realised that things showing tracheostomies and feeding tubes are quite effective, and we also did some focus groups with WA health professionals to talk through what they thought would really shock people. And from that, then the Voice Box campaign was made. So that used real people, was graphic and showed negative health consequences. And also very recently, we've worked with Michael Murphy to conduct focus groups online for the first time with WA smokers to guide the direction of our next campaign, which will be produced this year. So that's me done. And I just want to acknowledge the enormous team effort over the past 10 years that I've been at Cancer Council, and thanks to the team, both past and present, and also the agencies that we work so well with. So thank you very much. And it's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Sally Blaine. Well, there she is. I was just going to talk about how great you are, but everyone started clapping. This is broken. There we go. I'll fix it for you. Did you break it? Yep. Should I just start then? Yep. All right. Thanks, Lou. My name's Sally Blaine. I'm the SunSmart manager. However, I do need to fess up that none of the work I'm describing today is my own. I do need to acknowledge the work of Carolyn Minto, who's here somewhere, and she's over there. So thank you to Carolyn, and also massive big thanks to Mark Strickland, thank you, who's our recently retired SunSmart manager, and also acknowledgement to Terry and Melissa for their guidance over the years as well. So like several of the programs showcased today, SunSmart aims to improve public understanding and awareness, leading to associated behaviour change and trying to ensure that our environments are safe from harms. So in our case, that's protection from overexposure to UV radiation, therefore reducing skin cancers. And this is because skin cancer places a significant burden on our health system and is almost entirely preventable. So this is a snapshot of some of the SunSmart mass media campaigns in WA. And I guess just to reiterate what Libby said, the way that we produce campaigns, it's kind of same as Make Smoking History. So SunSmart in WA has run mass media campaigns spanning several decades, commencing in the early 1990s. Just some of them are shown here. They're not all WA produced campaigns. Some of them were produced in other states. While the overall aim is to improve sun protection to prevent skin cancer, we have focused on specific topics such as tanning, the UV index, and the cumulative nature of UV radiation exposure. We've included emotional testimonials, educational, entertaining, and sometimes graphic executions. We'd like to acknowledge our funding support from the WA Department of Health and from Healthway, and also a shout out to Cancer Council Victoria, who actually owns that SunSmart brand. Today I'm very fortunate to be able to cherry pick some of the campaigns and describe them here. It all started with Slip, Slop, Slap and Sid Seagull back in 1980. So this was a federal campaign, and despite a very hopeful start back in the 80s, federally funded sun protection campaigns have been pretty short-lived, and there's actually only been 2 in the past 40 years. So there's some common threads to the way we run SunSmart campaigns here in WA. We generally develop new campaign material every 3 years, and that's mainly due to cost. Our ads are targeted towards those younger age groups, and that's because we know that those sun protective behaviours are worse in young people, and sun protection is vital at any age, the younger you are, the more important it is to protect your skin, as the panel mentioned this morning. As summer is when UV is at its highest, that's when we show our ads. Our TV ads are shown in metro and regional areas, as is radio. We have live reads that are broadcast at the start of the day. There's no point telling people about UV at 6 o'clock at night, and that's to prompt sun protection behaviours. Our bus ads that you can see here, they're actually skewed more towards those coastal regions and where people are out and about. So here's just a couple of, quite old actually, but some creative examples of some out-of-home advertising, one of which is a sunscreen dispenser. The other bus ad there was part of a broader campaign to ban solariums in WA, so don't pay for skin cancer.
This included the Claire Oliver testimonial campaign and drew significant attention to the dangers of solarium and helped to gain public support in that area. That campaign featured Claire, a young woman who developed a deadly melanoma, which she attributed to solarium use. And solariums were officially banned in WA on the 1st of January in 2016. So one example of one of our campaigns that I'll use here is our UV Index campaign, which ran from 2012 to 2015. In-house, we very affectionately call it the Jimmy campaign, and you saw it on the show reel before. However, never one to pass up an opportunity to do some UV education. Do you know what the max UV will be here today in Perth? I'd like you to hold up how many fingers. What is today's max UV? Is it 10? Is it 5? Is it 0? Is it 26? Everyone? How many fingers? Okay, we'll hand fingers down. We still need to keep running campaigns. If you're online, you can do that where you are as well. I'm not going to tell you the answer. To find out, you can download the free SunSmart app, or you can visit myuv.com.au to find the UV index where you are. I do know though, by the way. So about a dozen years ago, it was acknowledged that the public had limited knowledge of the UV index. Maybe that's still the case. The general message was to protect yourself between 10 and 2. It was very time-based. For a landmass the size of WA, it just wasn't applicable, and it wasn't an accurate message. So Cancer Council, with the help of Cooch, developed a world first UV index campaign, one that we're really proud of. Focus groups conducted by Owen Carter found that the knowledge and understanding of the UV index was suboptimal, and we had to assume the public knew very little about the UV index and UV3 and above. It really marked a change in messaging from SunSmart WA, and we now try to explain that really complex concept to our audience. So with this ad, we tested 3 concepts, and the animated transition concept was the one that was best received. The ad carefully considered the movement of the sun, the UV index rising, seeking shade of the middle of the day when its UV is at its peak. And like I said, it became our Jimmy campaign. This was aired on TV, radio, buses, air ads, and online. We still use it now, actually, in some instances. So in terms of evaluation for this campaign, from our National Sun Survey, 19% of people in WA identified UV3 as the correct level that sun protection is required, and that's in the campaign's 2nd year. Other states range between 4% and 9%. That number did decline slightly the next time that Sun Survey was conducted, but after the campaign was over, WA and South Australia, where the campaign also aired, were still significantly higher than other states. And our WAC-Crew evaluation showed that by the end of the 3rd summer of showing the campaign, 73% of adolescents and 67% of adults reported that seeing the ads helped them to understand that UV index. As well as that mass media campaign, we also developed the website myuv.com.au. This site produces daily UV bell curves, like that one you can see there, for hundreds of locations across Australia. Around about the same time, the Bureau of Meteorology stopped producing these graphs for the public. So we use their data and provide that information for them. So another campaign that you possibly haven't seen, I would assume no one here is an outdoor worker, but again was shown on the reel before. So since 2015, SunSmart we've also run a really cost-effective campaign targeting a very niche audience of outdoor workers, particularly those who are self-employed or work in small businesses. So this audience told us to keep it light. They didn't want really heavy campaigns, and they just wanted a little quick reminder at the start of the day. So this is a small campaign, it's only digital, but it's been a really successful one for that audience. So are we making a difference? This was mentioned this morning, but yes, melanoma rates in young people have halved in the last 25 years. However, we could be doing better. So this is some of the evaluation that we gather as part of our CADDI survey at the end of every campaign. This one shows the portion of respondents who still like to get a sunburn. It's split into adolescents and adults. There is a decline, but it's not as much of a decline as we'd like. And still over 50% of adolescent females like to get a tan. Similarly, this is one showing sunburn rates. So it's still pretty stable, and there's still a lot of work that we need to do here. So challenges, there's not much on this slide, but there's probably a lot to say. So we acknowledge that we are very lucky and privileged here in WA. Just about every other state in Australia has no skin cancer prevention mass media campaigns. However, we can do more, and we really hope to do so. So in terms of our budget, we would like to extend beyond the summer periods. We know that particularly in the north of the state, it's not always relevant in summer. They need that information year round. We know that being on air regularly also keeps things top of mind for our audience. Media's evolved, as mentioned, as well, so we can buy a little bit across most platforms, but not quite enough. There's also evaluation challenges. It's getting harder and more expensive. And unfortunately, with no national campaign since 2008, we're kind of on our own in this space. Moving on to funding. So for the first time in 20 years, SunSmart campaign in WA is facing a little bit of an uncertain future due to a decline in funding. So TV may not run in WA beyond this summer, and we really like to see greater reach of that SunSmart message. We know that without sustained efforts, the gains we have made over the past 20 years can be lost, as you can see in some of those sunburn and behaviour rates. So with that, I'll pass on to moving from skin cancer onto bowel cancer, and going on to, oh, sorry, there's one more. Just thanks to all this, thanks to those people. Okay, you can come up now. Sorry, Melissa, this is Melissa Treby.
Thank you, Sally. Always a hard act to follow. Why? Thank you. So Melissa alluded to the fact earlier that you'd be hearing about some large-scale campaigns and some little tiny ones as well. And here I am, the little tiny campaign. Before I do start, I would like to, excuse me. Oh, beg your pardon, I've lost a slide already. I would like to make a quick acknowledgement of two of my colleagues who really were the driving force behind this campaign, Melissa Ledger, who you already know, and Shannon Wagner, who is a former colleague of ours who's now moved on to clinical work as an occupational therapist. So today I'm talking about a little campaign that we did to highlight the issue of bowel cancer and participation in the National Bowel Cancer Program. Excuse me. So just a quick background. So yes, bowel cancer is the second biggest cancer killer in Australia. And if you're over age of 50, your risk of bowel cancer increases. 1 in 13 people in Australia will get bowel cancer. But the good news about bowel cancer is that if it's found early enough, you have a 90% of people can be treated successfully. And the even better news is that we do have a bowel cancer screening program. And here comes the bad news. It isn't participated in particularly well. So the government sends a bowel cancer testing kit every 2 years to people, eligible Australians, once they reach the age of 50 through to the age of 74. And even though we know that this kit is incredibly effective at detecting bowel cancer, not only before it shows any symptoms, but sometimes even before the cancer starts to develop, we can detect polyps in the intestine. People unfortunately don't participate to the rate that we would like. So we were fortunate to have a little bit of funding left over to start a small campaign trying to highlight the issue of participation in the National Bowel Cancer Screening Program and how important it is. And before I continue, I must stop and let you know that we had a very small budget, and what you're about to see today could not have been done without the kindness of Gatecrasher and other people within that space, some of the buying agencies. I don't pretend to know all the people involved, but we had people donate their talent, people donate their time, and it really is a good example of people coming together for what is a really worthwhile cause. So I would like to acknowledge that before I go on. So, as I said, a very small budget, but we did manage to follow the campaign protocols that have been discussed today. So we did do our formative work, we had full briefing, some concepts and concept testing, which I'd like to go through with you now. So we did do a community survey of 400 people to find out what they knew about the National Bowel Cancer Screening Program and more broadly what they knew about bowel cancer. We had some interesting results from that, but what we did find out is that of the people that we spoke to, 50% approximately had already received the kit, and of those people, about 70% had done the kit. So we're interested to know what makes people do the kit and what makes people not do the kit. Oh. I'm getting some slides that I don't remember putting up, so excuse me if I'm looking a bit perplexed. Anyway, carry on. So what we discovered were the top reasons that people chose to complete the kit was convenience, that it's in the convenience, you know, it's in your own home, quite simple to do. Looking after their health, and obviously seems obvious to ensure that they had no bowel cancer. Conversely, the top reasons for non-completion were people were embarrassed. They'd had another test, which when we extrapolated on that, it was usually they'd had a colonoscopy done. And also they were worried about sample collection, doing it correctly, and, you know, the distasteful aspect that it is, you know, let's be honest, let's put the word out there, playing with poo. Okay, we've said the poo word, we can move on. So with that in mind, 3 concepts were initially developed. We have the holy crap, give a crap, and stick it to number 2. Holy crap was based on the idea that, you know, bowel cancer is scary and you should be scared, and because you should be scared, you should do your kit. Give a crap was a testimonial type concept. In other words, care about your health, because these are people who did the kit and they did it and it saved their life. And then finally, stick it to number 2, which highlighted sort of a double entendre of bowel cancer being the number 2 cancer killer, but also bowel cancer requiring you to test your number 2s. So in the beginning stages, holy crap was sort of eliminated mainly, I think, due to expense. It was quite an expensive concept. And give a crap and stick it to number 2 were taken through to concept testing. Now, both of the concepts were tested and they were both found to be believable, relatable, easy to understand, and that they could both impact positive behaviour change. But ultimately, stick it to number 2 was chosen, firstly, because of the double meaning I mentioned. It was creative, and there was the problem of having to find champions for the other concept. And if any of you have ever had to try to find champions, it's quite a difficult task, and it just seemed that would make the whole concept a bit more difficult to deliver. So stick it to number 2 it was. And here's some examples of some of our angry little poos. And if you're a teenager in the 80s like I was, you'll recognize quite a few of these characters. You know, I think we've got Jason up there, and we've got, you know, It, and we've even got some more recent ones like Saw and Scream, and some Frankenstein and Dracula for the real oldies in the room. I think Terry might have left now, I'm not sure. Anyway, so the online campaign went ahead and it was skewed towards the younger ages. I think I mentioned in the beginning that the national screening program is for 50 to 74-year-olds, but this advertising was skewed towards the lower half of that cohort, if you like. And the reason for that is that even though participation in general is low, and in the time of this campaign, it was around about 39%. Of people who are eligible actually participate. But within that particular lower half of the age cohort, the participation rate's even lower. So most of this was skewed towards them. We had lots of assets created, a fabulous microsite, which is still online actually, and you can go there and practice stabbing your poo. There's a really fun interactive game if anyone's got a spare 10 minutes later today. And also lots of assets for YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and etc. So yes, these are definitely different slides, but anyway, never mind. So here is some of the assets that we produced. And as you can see, we had a very, very small budget, but actually the value that we received was around about the 83,000 mark. And again, thanks to Gatecrasher and some of their other agencies that they worked with, really a phenomenal opportunity for us as an organisation. Bowel cancer screening isn't, you know, well, we do receive funding from the Department of Health, for which we're very grateful, but we don't receive anything like the funding that some of the bigger key ticket issues like tobacco, etc. do. So it was really, really appreciated and is still to this day. I was going to show you the advert, but I think you saw it in the show reel now, so I'll skip across. So a little bit about the microsite. I don't know, hopefully it comes up on the screen. You can see at the top there were 4 tabs: why test, eligibility, the kit, and your story. And we had over 18,000 page views to our website, and people, if they clicked through, 20% of people clicked through to a tab, which then led to them following the path to actually going to the federal government's National Bowel Cancer Screening Program website, which was a really exciting result. We had an overwhelming response from media, free placement on radio, TV, press channels, and I believe Gatecrasher even won some campaign awards, some advertising awards through their own industry award sessions. Yeah, so that was basically the campaign in a nutshell. What we did learn is that we realised, one thing I should have mentioned, I suppose, is that we noticed that more women were engaged with the campaign than men. So that led us to maybe consider that sometimes you need to consider gender, especially because if you're trying to get a certain gender to participate more than others, although in bowel cancer screening, poor participation is quite uniform across the genders, so it's not really such a big problem. Implementing scheduling outside of our target cautiously, and that's related to later on in the campaign, we did do some targeting to younger people as influencers, but that didn't have as good engagement, and it did create some issues with feedback and negative response about the campaign. Monitor social commentary. It was a really good opportunity for us to find champions. As I mentioned to you before, it's particularly hard to find people who are prepared to talk about their cancer journey. And I think that difficulty is enhanced by an order of magnitude. When you're talking about bowels and poo, people are even less inclined to want to share their story. But finally, I think the biggest key take-home point for this little campaign was to consider humour in tackling what is a stigma topic for some people. And I think the idea of, making these scary little poos coming out of the toilet was a really innovative one, something we haven't seen since or before, I don't believe. And even last year when we presented about it at the BRCC conference, our colleagues in the eastern states all thought it was really, really wonderful and really, really something outside of the box. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. And I believe I'm introducing my colleague Cassandra Clayforth, who's the Regional Education Manager at Cancer Council. Thank you.
Your notes. All right, so I'm also talking about a very small campaign that runs on the smell of an oily rag, and I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, the Noongar Whadjuk people, and pay my respect, and also acknowledge our funders, Department of Health, and our wonderful team who've pulled this together, as well as past team members and the University of Western Australia who initiated the research that brought this campaign to us. So we run the Find Cancer Early campaign because in Western Australia we have such a vast state. It's so big, its landmass is bigger than Western Europe. For that reason, we have some geographical barriers to people in our regions getting diagnostic services and getting treatment. So in addition to those geographical barriers, because diagnostic services and treatments aren't always provided in the regions, there's also research that showed that there's bottlenecks in the diagnostic pathways, as well as regional people have different characteristics that stops them or delays them from seeking help. And so they tend to come up with benign explanations for their symptoms. So while survival for common cancers in Australia is improving, there is this gap between rural and urban people in terms of their cancer survival, and rural patients essentially have poorer survival when it comes to cancer. So the Find Cancer Early campaign aims to increase cancer symptom awareness in regional people over 40. Over 40 because that's when the risk of cancer, especially common cancers, increases, and motivate them to see a doctor earlier. And the campaign revolves very heavily around this yellow checklist. It's a checklist of the 10 most common symptoms for the 5 most common cancers. So bowel, prostate, lung, skin, and breast. And we run a mass media campaign, as well as if anyone heard James Harris talking yesterday, you can't rely on just traditional media. Even social media doesn't get to everybody. So we have such a vast area to get our message across to. So we actually hire regional education officers that are located throughout the state, and you can see them on this map. They're the yellow dots on the map of WA there. And they just essentially ensure that our messages are getting to people locally. So the mass media campaign, for the last 6 years, we've been running a Rural Doctors campaign and Gatecrasher produced this campaign. I believe it was pro bono. So we got that for pretty much next to nothing, which was wonderful. That campaign includes real regional doctors talking about common symptoms, and they're in the bathroom highlighting those common symptoms. So blood in your poo, blood in your pee, coughing up blood, etc. Maybe I don't have the time to go through every ad, but maybe when it comes to the Q&A sessions, you might want to lobby the panel members to show some of the ads. That ad is also played on digital channels such as YouTube, Facebook, Gmail over the years. We also have Google AdWords, where people can search cancer symptom terms, and that directs them to our website. And then we've got supportive media such as radio ads and print ads utilising the checklist that was on the previous screen. So yeah, we'll show that later maybe. So we evaluate all of our campaigns afterwards. And last year, after the Rural Doctors campaign, we did a caddy survey of 1,000 regional people, and 250 people in each region were included in that survey. And it was an equal split of gender, and people over 40 were included. So what we did find after 6 years of running that campaign is the awareness of the campaign reached a new height, and that was 77%. Of those that have seen the campaign, 11% saw a GP afterwards, and 10% started monitoring their symptoms or monitoring their body for symptoms. 60% saw a GP within 3 months. And then we asked about recall of symptoms. And what we found is that after that campaign, we only had 16% that could recall 3 or more symptoms. This was a drop from 25% the year before. We don't know if that's from campaign wear out or from COVID last year, because COVID has a lot of symptoms to remember itself. So we realised ourselves, we didn't have to do any formative research. We realised it's time for a new ad. So we'll talk a bit about the new ad that we've produced. And then what we've also identified is that recall of 3 or more symptoms has only ever been 25%, which is quite low. And we think that's because the message is too complicated. It's too much for people to remember. So this next campaign and future campaigns will only focus on 3 symptoms at a time, just to improve that recall. So our Regional Champions TV ad includes real people from the regions who have been diagnosed with cancer or lost loved ones with cancer. So we ended up, our team filmed this last year when the COVID complexities were arise, with travel and things like that. So we actually invited 6 people to actually film the ad, thinking and anticipating that probably only 3 people could make it. And 3 was all we needed. We were absolutely delighted to see that all 6 came and filmed the ad. That was how passionate they were. We didn't engage a creative agency to create the ad because, one, we already had 30 personal testimonies on our website. So we had an amazing array of people who wanted to share their story. And because we don't have a lot of budget, we just couldn't afford to pay anyone to come up with the script. So we actually developed that ourselves. And yeah, maybe at the end we could show you that ad. So in terms of developing it, 4 concepts were actually recorded. So our staff recruited volunteers to actually record the ads in the destination that we were looking at recording it. And so we call them mock-ups. We then pre-tested those mock-ups via SurveyMonkey. And once again, we don't have any money to engage an agency to do this. So our regional education officers actually disseminated this SurveyMonkey, and it reached 149 people in the different regions of WA, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The TV and that SurveyMonkey was just essentially asking things about comprehension and relevance, and if the message was appropriate. And all of the findings were very helpful and indicated that, yeah, please do go ahead with recording this ad. So the TV advert was recorded in Bunbury in the southwest region. Once again, once we filmed it to ensure that we don't have a milkshake issue with the federal government again, we actually did another SurveyMonkey and sent out a survey through our regional education officers, and we managed to get 77 regional people to complete that. Then radio adverts were recorded in Geraldton in the Midwest, and then print adverts were developed in Perth, but with champions from all the regions. And those print adverts, the suite of those print adverts with all of our champions can be shown here. So they're all throughout newspapers throughout the regions. And the radio adverts essentially included 4 personal testimonies. It's a similar script to the TV ad, but just with 4 people to show the diversity of people within Western Australia, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well. So we have quite a lot of challenges having such a small budget and having such a vast landmass to cover. So with our budget, we only have $400,000 a year to run our campaign. When you have staff or disseminated all throughout the state, and then Sally touched on about evaluation can be quite expensive, it doesn't really leave us with a lot of money to actually run our campaign and to pay for ads. We also have issues with our evaluation in terms of we evaluate people over 40, and in the Kimberley and the Pilbara, they're younger demographics. So finding 250 people over the age of 40 is quite difficult in those 2 regions. And then regional areas don't always provide media tracking. So if you run radio ads, for example, in the metro area, you get media tracking results. That doesn't happen in the regions because regional radio stations can't afford to pay an external agency to track that for them. So you don't always know how your ads are getting, how much they're being delivered. And then my favourite challenge, which I swear one day I'm going to write a book about this or do a PhD on it, is that we get rejected by social media platforms all the time. So back in 2018, we tried to put the Rural Doctors ad on Facebook and that was denied. 2020, we put the Rural Doctors ad on Gmail and that was denied. And then 2021, the Regional Champions ad was put on YouTube and that was also denied. So in some of the cases, we've had to do some really indirect ways to get around that. Facebook, we managed to get some ads on there. YouTube, we did eventually get the ads on there. It's a very cumbersome process talking to big social media platforms that work globally. And I'm happy to talk through some of that in the Q&A session. I see a lot of people with surprised looks on their faces, so I know I'm going to get a lot of questions about that. But yeah, so before we, so yes, essentially thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then I'd like to introduce Julia Stafford to talk about the alcohol programs.
Hello everyone, I'm the Alcohol Program Manager at Cancer Council WA, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues at Cancer Council and the Mental Health Commission, Public Education Health Promotion team, and 4 of those team members are here in the room today. So our goal is to share the story of how an evidence-based public education campaign in the right circumstances can have a long lifespan and remain relevant. So I'll touch on the initial development of the campaign, how it evaluated, and where we are today. So the work I present is really a credit to the team, the current and the former team members at the Mental Health Commission, formerly the Drug and Alcohol Office, who have really led a lot of this work. And so the success of the Alcohol Think Again campaigns is really a credit to the team. The Alcohol Think Again education program, it's part of a comprehensive approach in WA that aims to reduce the impacts of alcohol on the community. It's unique in Australia as a sustained, evidence-based public education program that aims to raise awareness of the harms from alcohol and the strategies to minimise your risks of harm. The program's delivered in a collaborative approach between the government, so the Mental Health Commission, and non-government organisations, currently Cancer Council. We enjoy a close working relationship in the delivery of the campaigns. The Mental Health Commission staff manage the day-to-day delivery of the campaigns, and Cancer Council are actively involved in all key stages of the development through the working group and expert reference group. There are 3 streams, as you can see, to the Alcohol Think Again program, and each stream is informed by the National Low Risk Drinking Guidelines. The health stream seeks to reduce the risk of long-term harm from alcohol. The Parents and Young People stream seeks to reduce the risk of alcohol to young people, with the primary target audience being parents of 12 to 17-year-olds. And finally, the pregnancy stream seeks to reduce the risk of harm to developing babies. So we'll focus today just on one of the campaigns, the first Alcohol Think Again campaign about long-term harm to health. So how did SPREAD start? Well, in about 2009, the then Minister for Mental Health identified a need for a campaign about alcohol and cancer with particular consideration of women. And so began the journey to what we now know as SPREAD. Formative testing with WA adult women explored their values, attitudes and beliefs around alcohol use, and they found that the long-term health effects of alcohol, including alcohol-related cancers, were not well understood. The SPREAD campaign was developed by the Drug and Alcohol Office in partnership with Cancer Council and the Injury Control Council of WA, as it was called then. The campaign launched in May 2010 by the then Minister. There were 4 key bursts to the campaign between 2010 and 2012. Campaign was led by TV and supported by press ads. Media buy was targeted at WA women aged 25 to 54, and the secondary target audience was the broader WA community. The key objectives for SPREAD during its development were to raise awareness of alcohol-caused health problems, including alcohol-caused cancers, to increase awareness of how you can stay at low risk in accordance with the National Low Risk Drinking Guidelines, and to increase the personal relevance of the alcohol and cancer message among the target group. There had been previous Alcohol Think Again campaigns that focused more on the immediate harms from alcohol, but as I said, this was the first time that the campaign sought to communicate the NHMRC low risk drinking guideline to reduce the long-term risk of harm to health. I will now attempt to play the ad just to make sure we all know what we're talking about.
Alcohol causes cancer. Once absorbed into the bloodstream, it travels through the body. With every drink, the risk of cell mutations in the breast, liver, mouth, throat, and bowel increases. These cell mutations are also known as cancer. Stay at low risk of alcohol-caused cancer and other diseases. Reduce your drinking to reduce your risk. Alcohol. Think again.
So that was the slightly updated version of SPREAD ad. It was just slightly different, which I'll talk about in a sec. Here we go. So Spread received international recognition for its ability to achieve behaviour change. Firstly, the post-campaign evaluation provided encouraging evidence that the campaign had met its stated objectives. More than 9 in 10 people believed either a little or a lot that there is a link between drinking alcohol and getting cancer, and that the more you drink and the more often, the greater your risk of cancer. 47% correctly identified the number of standard drinks per day considered low risk to health, and that was a 10 percentage point increase from baseline. Among those who said that they had seen the Spread ad, the proportion with current knowledge was even higher. That was a 25 percentage point increase from baseline. More than half of respondents felt that Spread made them consider the health effects of regularly drinking above the low risk guideline and made them want to drink within the guideline on a regular basis. The campaign was particularly effective with risky drinkers. With those who generally drank above the low risk drinking guideline, they were more significantly more likely to be concerned about their own alcohol use, to want to drink slightly less, and to intend to drink less. It's also important to note that while the post-campaign evaluation found that the ad resonated more strongly with women, men were more likely to feel concerned about their own drinking upon seeing the ad, suggesting the campaign was both relevant and effective for the whole population. In 2015, some of the people involved in campaign development published the results of a cross-sectional pre and post-campaign evaluation survey in the journal BMJ Open. The research highlighted that the campaign was recognised by the majority of its target audience, with high prompted recall of its key message among those who'd been most exposed to the campaign. Women who drank above the low-risk drinking guidelines were the most likely to say that the ad had made them feel motivated to reduce their drinking. And among women who drank alcohol, the proportion intending to reduce their alcohol use increased significantly following the campaign. In 2017, the Centre for Behavioural Research in Cancer tested 83 English language alcohol harm reduction ads from around the world. They found that Spread was the most effective ad for motivating drinkers to reduce their drinking. Spread was also ranked in the number 1 or 2 positions within each of the audience subgroups. So in terms of younger and older audiences, males and females, and low risk and high risk drinking participants. The research showed that the top ranked ads were more likely to address the long-term harms from alcohol, more likely to include the drinking guidelines, were more likely than other ads to carry a why change message, and less likely to carry a how to change message. And they were more likely to be aimed at the general drinking population. So a series of health campaigns have followed Spread, seeking to retain those features that contribute to the effectiveness of the campaign, and they've sought to build on that knowledge of the guidelines and the long-term risks from alcohol. Phase 2 of the Alcohol and Cancer campaign, the Could Happen to You campaign, featured Professor Ian Olver, the then CEO of Cancer Council Australia. What You Can't See launched in 2014, and that explained that alcohol causes a range of long-term health harms, including cancer, liver disease, heart disease, and stroke. Glass Body was next, emphasising that alcohol is toxic, the body is fragile, and alcohol can damage the fragile body. Following the onset of the COVID pandemic, an extension to the Glass Body campaign called Immunity focused on sharing tips for reducing harm from alcohol while we were staying at home, working at home, etc. So tailored for that home environment. Despite being developed over a decade ago, the imagery and messaging of Spread remains relevant. Groups in several Australian jurisdictions have sought to license Spread for use in their own jurisdictions, and the campaign was translated into Finnish and aired by the Cancer Society of Finland. Last year, Spread was remastered and relaunched in WA, and you saw the remastered version just before. That decision was made based on several factors. First was the encouraging evaluation results that I shared. Another consideration was cost effectiveness. If we spend less on developing the campaign, we can spend more on the media buy and getting it in front of people. And the fact that the campaign had been out of market for most of the time since it initially launched in 2010, suggesting that for many of the target audience of 25 to 54-year-olds, it would be new information. While it's largely running as it was in 2010, there have been some minor tweaks in consultation with the expert reference group. For example, the call to action was changed from the explicit low-risk drinking guideline in 2010 to now being the message of reduce your drinking to reduce your risk. And that was largely because the NHMRC was in the process of updating their low-risk drinking guidelines at the time, so it was unclear exactly what the guideline would be. And the second key learning was adopting learnings from the previous campaigns. So spread messaging was complemented by tactical tips, messaging that promoted evidence-based strategies to help people reduce their drinking. For example, counting your drinks and having alcohol-free days each week. So those messages were delivered contextually to intervene at key times, key decision-making times, for example, in shopping centres near to liquor stores and on social media. The campaign is across a more diverse range of media channels these days, as you might expect. That reflects that contemporary diverse media landscape. So it is still led by TV, but it's strongly supported by other forms such as catch-up TV and other digital TV, out-of-home advertising, GP clinics, social media, radio, and paid search. The post-campaign evaluation results from the most recent airing of Spread will be available later this year. Spread will be in market until around October, and then you'll have to watch this space for what comes next. If you'd like to see anything more about the long history of Alcohol Think Again campaign and all the tools and resources they have to support the mass media channels, I encourage you to have a look at the Alcohol Think Again website. It's now my pleasure to introduce Kelly Kennington, the manager of the obesity prevention team.
Okay, thank you. I am going to talk about our Live Lighter campaign. I'm just going to, rather than talk about the campaign in its entirety, just focus on the development of our most recent campaign as a bit of a case study. Before I start, I just want to obviously acknowledge the Department of Health who fund 100% of our campaign essentially, and they have done since 2012 when it was delivered by the Heart Foundation. The Department of Health is not just a funder, they are a genuine part of what we do every single day. They are part of our team, and we're very, very grateful for their input, not just their money, but obviously we do love their money a lot. So I'm just going to run you through how we did. Can you read that okay? You might not be able to. This is just a slide that summarises our Live Lighter model. So you'll see up the top, really that part of that top box summarises where we get the evidence for our campaign. So, you know, we look at the policy context. What is it saying in the WA Health Promotion Strategic Framework we should be focusing on? What does the World Health Organization say? What do the other guiding documents say we should be focusing on? We also look to expert opinion, and we're really lucky at Cancer Council that we have access to so many experts, whether they be behavioural researchers, medical experts, oncologists, Ellen Hart sitting in the front row. You know, there are so many people we are able to draw on, and it's great to see David Preen here today too from our research advisory committee, and he's also someone that we get advice from. So we have a specific group of people that we talk to for the Live Lighter campaign. When we were looking to develop this campaign, Adam and I, Adam Barker from Gatecrasher and I went and met with a couple of our experts and asked them, you know, what's new? What else does it, what are the other health risks associated with being above a healthy weight that we might be able to tell people that they don't know about? So we were looking at really complex chemical interactions that happen in your liver. I think I'll stop talking now before I even attempt to talk about those sorts of things. But we talked to a bowel cancer specialist. We talked to someone who specialises in metabolic syndromes. We spoke to a heart expert. We spoke to a lot of people that really fed into some of the questions we wanted to dig around in our brief to Michael Murphy when we then moved on to our formative research. We also looked at the data that we'd been receiving from the group that evaluate our campaign, and that's the Centre for Behaviour Research in Cancer Control, which is based at Cancer Council Victoria. And we knew from that data that cancer was still new for a lot of people. Many people are very aware of the risk of being above a healthy weight with type 2 diabetes and heart disease, but there's still, we knew we needed a long way to go to talk about the cancer risk. And that was then obviously reinforced with some of our focus groups as well. And we also obviously look at peer-reviewed literature. And what's difficult in this space is that we're the only ones doing it. We're the only ones really with a comprehensive obesity prevention campaign. So when it comes to looking at what other people are doing, we are pretty much it at the moment. And that has implications because unlike Make Smoking History, who have a lot of agencies they can go to adapt material, they can go to the CDC in the US, they can go to Cancer Council Victoria or South Australia, other states that have been strong in tobacco control. We can't steal creative from many people. And one of the ads you saw in our show reel, we did use from Cancer Council Victoria, which was fantastic, but that's rare for us. So it sort of underpins the importance of the process that we undertake when we develop our campaigns. So what we did is we did two different projects with Michael Murphy. One was the exploratory research that he was talking about and alluding to this morning, and that really was talking to people. How are you feeling when I tell you this bit of information? What do you feel about that? And really, what we're looking for in that type of research is what's really going to grab someone. What's going to create a bit of urgency around this issue? What's going to make people stop and think, well, I don't want that to happen to me. But also, what are some of the things people are battling with in everyday life, and where are they at when they make decisions? Because as Michael said, people will reject information that we put to them. A lot of people that we were speaking to in the group really didn't believe a lot of the cancer information. It was even, getting right into the detail of how do we deliver that cancer information in a way that people believe us, even when we have and then again, when we say, what would you say if you knew Cancer Council Western Australia was running these groups, and people immediately go, oh, well, then I'd believe it. And so, there's a lot of stuff we cover in those focus groups to really get the messages right. And I'll talk about the evaluation a little bit at the end. So we ran some focus groups. They were split by age group. We did some in Kalgoorlie not Kalgoorlie. We did them in Geraldton and Kalgoorlie, I think. It was so long ago. It was last year. And we also spoke to people in two different BMI ranges to see whether there was a difference in how we talk in terms of, looking at people who may want to prevent further weight gain now, and also preventing weight gain perhaps in the future. And so we got some really nitty-gritty information from people. We got some really important information about the tone. It's really important that we create empathy. So, and similarly with the Make Smoking History ads, we need people to know that we're on their side. We're not the government telling them what to do. We're really on their side, and we understand what's happening to them in their daily lives. But at the same time, we can't be too fluffy about it, because we want people to be worried enough to take action. So this is where the art comes into play, is really balancing up how we achieve that. And as I think Tony mentioned this morning, one of the really strong themes was we needed to show people together, or we needed to show people that they weren't alone. And so to achieve that, one of the strong recommendations from Michael is that show people in their everyday life, but show people with them, with others around them. You'll see in a minute how we did that. So once, the way it works is then we get, and we also have rules around attending focus groups. So don't get too excited when you hear someone say one thing, and that's a skill of someone like Michael, is actually bringing all that rich information together in some really clear recommendations for how we might put those findings and those insights into an ad. And what's really important with that is that we have Gatecrasher with us the whole time. So, you know, we're not just changing things at certain stages, we're changing things the whole way throughout. So during the focus groups, I think sometimes, you know, Adam and Michael would have a chat at the end and we change the order of how we discuss things. We change some of the stimulus, so some of the lines we'd get people to respond to. We were always changing things based on what was happening. And that's another important element of having such a strong relationship with an agency who is with you as part of the team throughout the whole process. So from that, we got Gatecrasher to come up with a series of concepts. And this is just an example of what those early concepts look like before they're produced into an ad. So we then put these into more research. So we've got our early research, then we put these specific concepts with scripts into research and find out, you know, are these hitting the mark? You know, are these ads performing in the way we're predicting them to perform? And if not, what do we need to change and what do we need to throw out? What do we need to keep? And I think in this instance, you know, we came up with a concept that was a bit of a hybrid of a number of things. And so from that, we've chosen a number of executions, and Menu App's the first one. So the beauty of this is that we were able to develop a bit of a plan for the next 3 years of some Live Lighter campaigns that will be developed that you haven't seen yet. The other thing was about the concept testing was really important. We've talked about unintended consequences, but for us, you know, we are genuinely concerned about unintended consequences from our campaign around things like weight stigma and other issues. And so it's really important we do everything we can to protect against those things. So for us, it was really important not to focus on people's weight in the ad, because really it's about what's happening on the inside, not about not about anyone's appearance. And also, you know, we found it was really hard for people to quantify how much is, you know, well, what do you mean? What can I eat? What can't I eat? And really just found that this very simple tagline, don't treat junk food as everyday food, was something that was just relevant to so many people and something that all of us can relate to. But we also found it was really important to show a solution. So we know that we can't just tell people what the problem is. We need to give them a really simple solution. And you'll see from our Live Lighter ads, we always provide a simple solution at the end, whether it be not choosing the sausage roll while you're paying for your petrol, or cutting down on your sugary drink consumption. Now, the other thing we do when we produce ads is we have other experts on set, like Anne Finch, who's our one of our staff members, who is our reality check person. So you'll see in this ad, hopefully you've all seen it, you saw it in the show reel, providing a solution that's actually relevant. We don't want mums going, so for example, we had this lady in one of the scenes when we were filming chopping up carrots, and Anne's like, whoa, if you are at the point where you're about to order Uber Eats, you're not going to go and chop up carrots. So, you know, that simple action, the Anne action now of the opening the jar, a simple action that is appropriate for that moment in time and is an appropriate solution. Having people, you know, changing things throughout the whole process, including when you're on set, there were lots of little changes like that. We've brought out some of those placements and put our messages up there as well. So they're right in the spot where normally people would be enticed to turn off, and we're in there telling them to keep driving. Obviously, digital is really important to us, and here's just some examples of some digital ads and social media as well. And sadly, well, not sadly, Jazz is on holidays, which is great for her, but we have, you know, one full-time person dedicated on managing our social media, which is a really important job because it really does help us get to people beyond just these traditional types of media. So we have a mix of paid social media, but also social media that we run as well. Okay, so how do we perform? So I mentioned before, our evaluation is done by CBRC, and Belinda Morley and Tegan Nuss look after this for us. And we have run surveys of, you know, around 1,000 people following each wave of advertising since the campaign started. So we can compare each wave of advertising to our baseline survey, which was conducted before the before the campaign started. And I'm just going to give you a couple of slides to give you an idea of the types of things we measure. So one of the really important things is this ad motivating? Has this made you motivated you to make any changes? You know, have you changed your intention? And obviously, increasing awareness, increasing intentions to change are all really important precursors of behaviour change. So we measure all of these things. And one of the important measures, and one of the things we've had most success, which is no surprise because it's been a key message of our campaigns, is a change in sugary drinks over time as well. And we've seen it not just in our own campaign evaluation, but interestingly in a Cancer Council Australia study of teenagers and teenage sugary drink consumption. WA has by far the lowest you know, so declines in sugary drink consumption among teenagers have happened in all states, but it's been a much steeper decline in WA, significantly steeper, and it does coincide with the launch of the Live Lighter campaign. Now, obviously, we don't target teenagers, but it's just another indicator of the broader success of Live Lighter, given, you know, we anticipate this is because parents obviously are a key target audience and they're making changes for what they're buying for their family. So these graphs show these post-campaign evaluations. But the other things we do when we launch a new creative is that we run cohort evaluations. So what that means is we survey people before the ads are on air, and then we survey the same people when the campaign comes off. And when we've conducted those surveys, and if anyone's interested, we've got a number of papers published on those surveys. We have seen significant decreases in sugary drink consumptions in many groups. And it's just such an important indicator of actual behaviour change among the same people. So the other thing that we've been able to do as a result of that really robust evaluation is that this week we launched the report, or Deakin University released this report that they did for us, which was an economic study of our campaign. And this is the point where if Jai 3 from Deakin is listening, please block your ears because I'm about to completely butcher your methodology. Many of you may know that Deakin University are the ones who did the ACE obesity policy analysis. They have a very sophisticated economic model around what are the most important, what are the best buys for policy. I think from memory, number one was taxing sugary drinks and alcohol as an obesity, the most cost-effective obesity policy. And so they were able to use that model and feed into it. They just feed into it. It's as simple as that. The results from our cohort evaluations. So they're able to make predictions based on those sugary drink consumptions about what does that mean? How does that translate into preventing obesity-related illnesses and those associated costs on our health system? And so what that report essentially says is not only is this campaign incredibly effective at behaviour change and producing really important population health benefits, it's also incredibly cost effective and is saving our health system, millions of dollars. So this type of research is just so important, but it couldn't be done if we didn't have that really robust evaluation in place. So I guess, one of the things that I'd like to highlight is we all talk about working together and that, us working with the Department of Health and other partners, but actually with this campaign, it goes so much deeper. It's Gatecrasher working with Initiative, who are working with Michael Murphy, who's working with Belinda Morley at CBRC, who's then working with Deakin University and doing some analysis for this report. Everybody is working together, and it's just so important, and I think testament to the results that we're seeing with this campaign. Oh, thank you.
Well done. It's just amazing to stand here and see these managers presenting the work of their teams and going through in detail the processes that they've gone through for their campaigns. And behind each of these managers, you see there's a remarkable team as well of staff at Cancer Council, not just the broader partners and stakeholders, but I am delighted that I get to work with these people every day, and I really rely on them, and you can see why they're experts in their field. So congratulations, and I'd like to invite them all back up and we can give them a clap on their way back up. While we're waiting, because we'll give some people time to get the Q&A function happening on their video conference, and we've only got a couple of minutes really, so I just wanted to bring them up so that you can see them all again. We probably have time for one question, because I have got something really exciting that I really want to share with you, and I hope you to stay with us for a few minutes to hear a few thank yous and some exciting news. So it's great timing, Live Lighter being the last presentation here today for our session, because just yesterday we've received confirmation for 5 years of funding for the Live Lighter campaign. So that ongoing commitment, which is so important. So you heard it first here. I'm pleased you all stayed. So really excited to be trusted with funding from the Department of Health to be able to deliver Live Lighter for another 5 years. So that's really going to make a difference and be a game changer, I think, for Live Lighter and seeing the results of that. So I've got lots of notes about that, but I'm not going to read them all out because it's going to take a lot of time. But I think we just look forward to working with the people who we've been working with in the past, but really working with those people that we have in the past, and Kelly's mentioned them, have really set us up to be successful in getting that next 5 years worth of funding. So thank you very much. Any questions coming through yet on the Q&A? Oh, okay. And all right, well then I'll leave the thank yous to the end. I thought there might not be any. So have we got any questions in the room as well? We'll just see what our load is going to be like. Okay, so we'll take one in the room and then we'll take one online and we'll tag team it.
Cassandra, I'm interested to hear how you won the battle against social media.
So in 30 seconds or less.
Oh gosh, yes, I could go on for it. This is my new PhD project. Yeah, okay, so the one with YouTube, the recent one, yeah, so YouTube has a system where you have to go back to them on their site and say why you challenge their health policy. And I should just first mention that they have these really broad health policies that are there to stop agencies or companies from taking advantage of people with personal hardship, such as medical conditions, such as cancer. So that's where we become a red flag instantly. And they have these policies set up so that you don't have companies or things like Pete Evan having a light machine to, help people avoid getting COVID. So they have a reason for being there. The problem is they probably get these ads all the time, and because they're a worldwide company, their policy doesn't seem to work out which agencies are government-funded agencies trying to provide life-saving messages. So yeah, so you go through a process where you write back to them on how their refusal isn't correct and how you should be approved your ad. And you don't get very far that way. So then you have to write an email with the same ID number. But then again, you get the same policy that says, no, we still won't accept you. So then you have to go to the next stage of asking them to call you. So then you wait around for them to call you. And then you get someone on the phone who just continues to read the same policy. And then you have to work really hard to talk to them, because when we finally got the person who spoke to us, they kept saying, but you're targeting people, like you're trying to take advantage of people because you're targeting people over the age of 40. So you're targeting people and doing the wrong thing. And we had to explain to them, well, actually, we're targeting people over the age of 40 because the risk of cancer increases once you get to that age. And we're actually trying to avoid people under 40 getting unnecessary anxiety. So we're actually trying to reduce anxiety, trying to save lives. And yeah, it took probably half an hour, that conversation, but in the end we got there. So yeah.
This all happens while you're already in field with your campaign, so it can delay that part of the campaign for a number of weeks. Let's hear from online. I know we've just hit 12 o'clock, but if you want to stay with us to hear some questions, that would be lovely.
So this comes from S. Besson. Why are your interventions biomedical behavioural approaches? Why not incorporate all the socio-ecological health determinants? It's not directed at anyone particularly.
Okay. Does anyone want to have a go at that?
I guess it's important to say that obviously the campaign doesn't do its job on its own, and it's always implemented within a comprehensive approach. So whether it's within a comprehensive approach just in the campaign or within the broader organisation or with the work that we're doing with other departments. So what in the area that I work in, for example, is that absolutely we need to be addressing food supply, food availability. We work closely to advocate for those things. We have a very strong policy team at Cancer Council that's working very, very hard to advocate for government intervention around food marketing, protecting children from exposure to food marketing, making it equitable, because we know that for example, junk food outlet density is much higher in low socioeconomic areas compared to high socioeconomic areas. Advertising is also highly concentrated in those lower socioeconomic areas. Often government intervention levels the playing field, and that's why we're advocating for government intervention to ensure that everybody is protected and everybody has the same access to a nice, healthy environment. So you know, my answer would be is that we're working hard to address all of those things with our partners and with our agencies, and that's where we really do rely on strong leadership from the Department of Health, for example, in our space, who's leading our health promotion strategic framework that really looks at comprehensive strategies to address the health issues that we're working on. So, you know, campaigns have a role, but it's not the only role.
Great. That's a great final point. And that was, I was just about to say exactly that. So thank you. Well done. We've got one more question online, and then I think we'll call it a day. Let's see how tricky this one is.
From Jeanette Ward. Back in the 1990s, and just bear with me, it's a little bit long. Back in the 1990s, evidence was very strong that campaigns not linked to primary care, i.e. GPs enabling to provide the individual risk assessment, screening, counselling, were far less effective in changing population outcomes than those which were integrated in geographic locations to the rest of the health system. I didn't hear much about how these campaigns are meaningfully linked to GPs and other service providers before going live.
Okay, I'll take that one, I think. Just quickly to say that this is a population approach, and that's really important to understand that we're talking to the entire population, not individuals about their individual health. Having said that, though, a number of our campaigns do have a component of GP education. And so when someone, for example, hears about a symptom for cancer that could potentially be a cancer symptom, when they go to their GP knows about our campaign and they know about the tools that we've developed for GPs. So we engage, that's that stakeholder engagement, and we really do take that seriously. Live Lighter also had some GP resources that we've developed. We always develop a toolbox for stakeholders to make sure they understand what our campaign is achieving. So it might not be explicitly involving general practice and primary care in our campaigns, but we certainly make sure that we address those important people. I'm going to wrap up. Please stay with me because this is so important that I get to say some thank yous in front of some people who can give a clap to these amazing people who've put today on as well. So I need to thank Dr. Natalia Lizama and Jordan Morrow for their work in getting some really crucial information, which I have failed to tell you because I haven't followed all of my notes as I should have. But we have got to information about the 4 campaigns, or the 4 major campaigns today that we've talked about, on our Cancer Council website now, for you to go and have a look at the campaigns, links to some really important documents, some of the evaluation reports that we've been talking about, as well as the impact and what the future considerations are for these campaigns. It's a really great website. It went live last night. Feel free to tweet and share and what have you. And it's cancerwa.asn.au. Is that a / campaigns? I like how everyone else is nodding because I don't even know that it's a /. So that's a really amazing website. And so Natalia and Jordan have been instrumental in getting that up and running for us. I was convinced by these young people in my organisation that a monograph was no longer appropriate, a printed document that you could all go home with, that it had to be online. So they did a really great job making that happen. So thank you. Thank you all also to our panel. I know many people have left, but the panel, they were just sensational this morning and facilitated by Miriam. A huge thank you to Abby Claire Vidler, who's behind the desk over there. She has really been the main contact and mainstay for this whole event that you see before us today. So really grateful for her sticking with us. This is what determination brings you. People just don't want to, no one wants to fail. I understand that, but man, it really is a driving force when you want something to really sparkle, and she's done that so well today. I've thanked the managers and our current staff. I think I've probably talked a lot about Department of Health and Healthway, and of course I failed to mention the Mental Health Commission, and so I do apologise for that. And I guess I think of Department of Health as this all-encompassing health machinery, and alcohol fits within there, but of course it doesn't. It's a separate funding partner. So we're very grateful to that being part of that funding partnership as well. And as I say, it really has been a privilege to be able to present this work to you today. If you're interested in getting more information from us, please go to our website, the new pages I just talked about. We're all contactable. We talk about stakeholder engagement and partnerships. Not only do we talk about it, but we do it. So if when you get back to your agency or organisation, you think that there's something that we can do for you, then please do get in touch. And thank you for coming and sticking with us. And to our guests online, thank you as well.